The Nvidia RTX 2060 and RTX 2070 are both decent gaming graphics cards, but which should you pick, and is it worth upgrading? In this video, we'll test out a bunch of games at 4K, 1440p, and 1080p to help you see the performance difference between them. Let's quickly take a look at how the RTX 2060 and RTX 2070 actually differ in terms of specs. Note that things like clock speed and power will vary between specific cards. These are just the reference specs for each model. The 2070 has more CUDA cores, higher base clock, but slightly lower boost clock, though again that will vary by card. Otherwise, the 2070 has 8GB of GDDR6 memory, while the 2060 has 6GB. And while 6GB is currently fine for most games, in the future we may start to see more being required in future titles. For the testing, I'm using the Gigabyte RTX 2060 WindForce OC and the Zotac RTX 2070 Mini. So my 2060 does have a small factory overclock while the 2070 is stock. However, overclocks generally only equate to a couple FPS here and there in most games. The system that I'm testing with has an Intel i7-8700K CPU in an MSI Z390 Gaming Pro Carbon motherboard running at stock speeds, along with 16GB of T-Force Nighthawk CL16 memory from Team Group, running at DDR4 3200 in dual channel. Check the links in the description for details on all of the components, as well as for up-to-date pricing. The same Windows version and Nvidia drivers were used for the testing, so let's get into the results. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark using high settings. In all of the upcoming graphs, I've got the RTX 2070 results shown by the green bars, and the RTX 2060 shown by the blue bars underneath, with 4K, 1440p, and 1080p resolutions listed on the left. Down the bottom at 1080p, we're looking at a 4.6% improvement to average FPS with the 2070. At 1440p, this rises to a 9% boost, and then a larger 12% boost at 4K, though not much of a change to 1% low. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode rather than multiplayer, as it's easier to consistently reproduce the test run, and this seems to be more graphically intensive. This game consistently saw the largest improvement between the two graphics cards. Starting with RTX off, at 1080p, the 2070 was giving us 13% higher average FPS when compared with the 2060, 12.6% more at 1440p, and then at 4K there was a 17% boost, with some nice increases to 1% low too. I've also tested Battlefield 5 with RTX on, and although overall the results don't look great, and I probably wouldn't want to play with either option, at least with the high settings that I'm testing with, there was a larger boost to performance, with the 2070 getting 16% higher average FPS compared to the 2060 at 1080p and 1440p, and then a large 23% increase at 4K. The largest out of all of my tests. Far Cry 5 was tested using the built-in benchmark with high settings. At 1080p and 1440p resolutions, I was actually seeing slightly lower 1% low results. However, the average FPS from the 2070 was consistently higher. At 1080p, the 2070 was around 5% faster, then 8% faster at 1440p, and then finally 10% higher at 4K, improving as we stepped the resolution up. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was also tested using the built-in benchmark. At the bottom of the graph, for our 1080p results, the 2070 was getting almost 10% higher average frame rate when compared to the 2060. Stepping up to 1440p, this rises slightly to an 11% improvement. Then finally at 4K, we're seeing just under a 13% boost using the 2070. Rainbow Six Siege was tested using the built-in benchmark at high settings. I've found this game to favour Nvidia's RTX graphics cards in previous testing, so we're seeing pretty nice results here compared to GTX cards. At 1080p, there's a 9.5% boost to average FPS when we use the RTX 2070, a 7.6% improvement at 1440p, and then at 4K, the game saw the smallest change for this resolution, with an 8.6% improvement over the RTX 2060. CSGO was tested using the Euletical FPS benchmark, and at 1080p there was a 6% improvement to average FPS, 5% at 1440p, and then a larger 13% increase at 4K with the RTX 2070. But realistically, either of these cards will play this game extremely well at about any resolution. Overwatch was tested in the practice range, as I can easily perform the same test run compared to playing with bots or other players, which will differ every time. The RTX 2070 was getting us a 10.6% improvement at 1080p, and then a 14% improvement at 1440p and 4K, making this consistently one of the best games tested on the 2070 when comparing with our 2060. there were much more improvements seen to the 1% low. 24% at 1080p, 20% at 1440p, and then 15% at 4K, where the 1% low was only just below the average frame rate of the 2060. PUBG was tested using the replay feature with the exact same replay at high settings. At 1080p, the RTX 2070 was seeing an 11% improvement to average FPS, making it the second highest improved game tested behind Battlefield 5. PUBG got second place again at 1440p, with a 16% increase to average FPS over the 2060, and then a 13% rise at 4K with no real change to 1% low at this resolution. Watch Dogs 2 is a resource-intensive game, and I can play it alright with a solid 30 FPS, so it was actually playing okay for me at 4K with very high settings, though ideally I'd use lower settings at that resolution. At 1080p, there was the smallest improvement out of all games tested, with just a 4% improvement to average FPS with the 2070, and not much difference to 1% low. Next, there was an 8.5% rise at 1440p, and finally a 12% increase at 4K, with larger improvements to 1% low now at these higher resolutions. In terms of overall improvement, over all 10 tests with a 1080p resolution, on average the RTX 2070 is performing 9% better than the RTX 2060 in average FPS. More CPU demanding games like Watch Dogs 2 are left down the bottom, while others like Battlefield 5 seem to really benefit from the increased GPU power. At 1440p, on average over the same games, the RTX 2070 was now scoring almost 11% higher average frame rates when compared with the RTX 2060. So a slight improvement as we increase the resolution. However, we can see that the results really vary between games. At 4K, the RTX 2070 was now on average 13.6% better than the RTX 2060 in these games. The average frame rate difference improves further as we step up in resolution and start becoming less CPU bound and really start to see what these graphics cards are capable of. I haven't tested overclocking here, as results aren't guaranteed and will vary between hardware based on what overclocks you can get. Realistically, it generally only makes a couple FPS difference. But I'll cover overclocking in the full review videos for each of these cards, so get subscribed for that. I suggest checking updated prices using the links in the description, as prices will change over time. The Gigabyte RTX 2060 I've used here goes for around $370 US, while other 2060s seem to currently start at around $350. The 2070 I'm using is around $530 US, but others start at $500. Going on these best case current prices, going from $350 for the 2060 to $500 for the 2070 is a 43% increase to price, which I don't think is really worth it for the 13% average improvement seen at 4K. You might find better prices on the secondhand market, but as RTX graphics are still fairly new, supply there may be limited. Based on the performance difference, there's no real reason to upgrade from the 2060 to the 2070 either, unless you're happy with the 10 to 13% improvement on average that the 2070 offers for that price. Personally, I'd want an upgrade to count for more and would instead be looking at something higher, assuming of course the 2060 wasn't cutting it anymore at some point in the future. It really comes down to what sort of games you want to play, what resolutions you want to play at, and what frame rates you want to target. If I was buying new today, I'd go the 2060. It's a much better bang for the buck. Buying the 2060 with RTX in mind at this time probably isn't a good idea. It seems a bit weak to really give a good experience, at least going by Battlefield 5, although I wasn't really getting all that great FPS out of the RTX 2070 either. Let me know which card you'd pick down in the comments, the 2060 or 2070, and don't forget to subscribe for more comparisons and future tech videos like this one.